Episode 24, The Ups and Downs of Kirtland, Ohio. Welcome back to Hidden and Distorted History of the Church, where we uncover the lesser-known truths about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. My goal is to reveal the authentic historical facts behind the Mormon Church. Recap. Last time, we tore apart the myth of the United Order and exposed how the LDS Church rewrites history to mask its failure, shifting the timeline to Utah to cover their tracks. We uncovered how Ezra Booth's revelations about Joseph Smith rattled the prophet to his core, leading to Booth's swift excommunication. And we laid bare the undeniable lie about Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery receiving the Melchizedek priesthood in 1829. Further evidence of the deception, just as David Whitmer had testified. This week we're diving into more layers of deceit. Some surface-level distractions like the tar and feathering of Joseph, and others that cut much deeper into the Church's tangled web of fabrication, such as Sidney Rigdon's failed coup. Part 1, The Missing Gause. Most LDS members have never heard of Jesse Gause, and that's no accident. The Church has worked hard to erase his existence from its history, but the question is, why? Gause wasn't just another early member. He was an early leader, serving as one of the first two counselors to Joseph Smith in the first presidency. His story, however, poses a significant threat to the narrative the Church has constructed, and understanding it opens up deeper questions about what else might have been erased. Born in 1785 in East Marlboro, Chester County, Pennsylvania, Jesse Gause grew up in a Quaker family. At 21, he was formally accepted into the Society of Friends, becoming a devout Quaker like his parents. Despite his pacifist upbringing, Gause didn't shy away from military service, joining the Delaware militia during the War of 1812. By 1831, Gause, along with his second wife and infant daughter, had moved to the Shaker community near North Union, Ohio. His first wife had died giving birth to their fourth child, and Gause left her remaining children in the care of his sister, who was also a Shaker. Around this same time, members of the fledgling Latter-day Saint movement began settling in Kirtland, Ohio, just 15 miles from Gause's new Shaker community. While it's unclear exactly when Gause first encountered the Mormon settlers, he was baptized into the faith sometime after October 1831. Despite being a recent convert, Gause rose rapidly within the Church. On March 8, 1832, Joseph Smith chose this day and ordained Brother Jesse Gause and Brother Sidney Rigdon to be my counselors of the ministry of the presidency of the high priesthood. A week later, Smith received a revelation from God confirming Gause's appointment, which also gave him additional instructions concerning his duties. Why would Joseph Smith, a man who placed so much emphasis on loyalty, choose a newcomer like Gause for such a critical position? The answer likely lies in Gause's previous experience with communal living. Having lived among the Shakers, Gause was well versed in communal societies, and the Latter-day Saints were in the process of implementing their own communal experiment, the United Order. Both Gause and Sidney Rigdon, Smith's other counselor, had valuable experience in these types of societies, making Gause an ideal candidate to help oversee this new system. Gause appeared to settle comfortably into his new role. He traveled with Joseph Smith to Jackson County, Missouri, in the spring of 1832 to assist in establishing the law of consecration. Upon returning to Kirtland, Gause embarked on a mission with fellow missionary Zebedee Coltrane. The two traveled to North Union on August 1, 1832, where Gause attempted to convert his wife, Minerva, to Mormonism, who refused to join when he had. She once again refused. In frustration, Gause tried to take their daughter but left very much enraged after failing to do so. Shortly thereafter, Coltrane became ill and returned to Kirtland. Gause continued on his mission alone, but his trail disappears from church records soon after. According to D. Michael Quinn, despite his brief prominence in the early church organization, he was virtually lost in the annals of church history until quite recently. The revelation given to him in 1832 was altered, with his name being replaced by Frederick G. Williams, the man who succeeded him in the first presidency. In fact, Gause's name wasn't publicly acknowledged until the 1980 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, where it appeared only in the historical introduction to the revelation. Frederick G. Williams's name, however, remains in the text itself. It wasn't until historians like Robert J. Woodford and D. Michael Quinn demonstrated Gause's role in the church's formation that his name was restored to the official list of general authorities. The question remains, why did Joseph Smith erase Jesse Gause from church history? Could it be, like Ezra Booth and other dissenters, Gause represented a threat to Smith's control? His rapid rise within the church, followed by his sudden disappearance, suggests there may have been more going on behind the scenes. Was he removed because he posed a challenge to Smith's authority, or was his usefulness simply exhausted? Another question is, how so many church members missed this erasure. For years, even those who diligently studied the Doctrine and Covenants had no idea that Gause's name had been deliberately replaced. It seems clear that Smith did not want future members to know that he had elevated a recent convert, someone who later became a dissenter, to one of the church's highest positions, someone he could manipulate, use, and then discard when it no longer served his purposes. Gause's story is a glaring example of how the church has carefully shaped its history to maintain an idealized image, hiding uncomfortable truths that could undermine its foundations. Part 2. A Pair Tarred and Feathered. On the night of March 24, 1832, an event took place that has since been surrounded by controversy, the tarring and feathering of Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith Jr. But what exactly makes this incident so contentious? Is it because the event never actually happened? No, it's because of why it happened, and the story behind it isn't as simple as the church would have you believe. That night, a mob violently tore Joseph Smith from his home. They broke down the door, ripped his eldest surviving adopted child from his arms, and dragged him into the cold darkness. The scene was nothing short of chaos. Smith himself was brutally assaulted. They stripped him, beat him relentlessly, and even tried to force poison down his throat. After the vicious attack, the mob tarred and feathered his body, leaving him for dead in the aftermath. Most LDS members are familiar with the story, supposedly due to accusations that he was having an affair with 16-year-old Miranda Nancy Johnson, the daughter of the family hosting Joseph and Emma at the time. In fact, some suggest Miranda was one of Smith's earliest plural wives, though we won't dive into that just yet. For years, I, like many others, accepted this narrative without question. But recently, a comment from Radio Free Mormon challenged everything I thought I knew. He suggested that the story behind the tar and feathering might not be true, or at least not the version we've been told. This piqued my curiosity, and I started digging. What I found was shocking. While I'm not sure if I uncovered the same information as RFM, what I did discover, using sources like Fair LDS, josephsmithspolygamy.org, Fawn Brody, Family History, and AnalyzingMormonism.com, paints a much murkier picture. There are two main versions of the story. Version number 1 comes from Clark Braden, a late, second-hand, and decidedly antagonistic account. Braden claimed that Miranda's brother, Eli Johnson, led the mob against Joseph because the prophet had become too intimate with Miranda. The mob supposedly brought a doctor to castrate Smith for his sexual impropriety. This would imply that Joseph's relationship with Miranda began much earlier than is often acknowledged. However, there's one glaring issue. Miranda didn't have a brother named Eli. A quick check of the Johnson family records proves that. Version number 2, which comes from Hayden and S.F. Whitney, points the finger at Simon's Ryder as the leader of the mob. According to this version, the violence wasn't about sexual misconduct. It was about money. Ryder and the mob were enraged over an economic scheme, the horrid fact that a plot was laid to take their property from them and place it under the control of Smith. Now let's talk about some verified facts, specifically from Luke Johnson, Miranda's real brother, whose testimony we have no reason to doubt. According to Luke, the men in the mob had painted their faces black. 2 of Miranda's brothers were indeed part of the mob. The mob tarred and feathered Joseph and beat him severely. They did bring a doctor, and they did intend to castrate him. At first, I was skeptical of these claims, so I looked into Eli Johnson and confirmed he didn't exist. Next, I examined the sources that were often cited, particularly the ones that claimed Eli Johnson led the mob. What I found was that most of the sources were second-hand and unreliable, providing information like Eli's name that was easily proven false. Even Fair LDS agrees that the claim about Eli Johnson comes from Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History, whose source is an 1884 statement from Clark Braden, a source that's both late and tainted by his anti-Mormon sentiment. Fair notes, Clark Braden, the source, also got his information secondhand and is clearly antagonistic since he is a member of the Church of Christ, the Disciples, seeking to attack the reorganized RLDS Church. Brody also gets the woman's name wrong. It is Mirinda Nancy, not Nancy Mirinda. And the account is further flawed because Mirinda has no brother named Eli. While I rarely side with Fair, I have to give credit where it's due. The Eli Johnson story is demonstrably false, and Brody's reliance on Braden weakens her argument. However, Fair loses credibility when they nitpick over the arrangement of Mirinda's name. That's hardly a valid reason to dismiss the broader claims about the event. As we dig even deeper into this event, an intriguing statement from Sidney Rigdon's son surfaces, shedding light on the brutal attack against his father during the infamous tearing and feathering. He recounts, the mob came and got Rigdon first. He was a man weighing about 225. As they dragged him some distance over the frozen ground by his heels, bumping the back of his head, so that when they got him to the place where they were to put the tar and feathers on him, he was insensible. They covered him with tar and feathers and pounded him till they thought he was dead, and then went to get J. Smith. The mob covered him with tar and feathers and pounded him till they got tired and left them both on the ground. J. Smith, soon after the mob left, got up and went home, not very badly hurt. This first-hand account paints a much more violent picture of the event than the church's retelling, especially concerning Rigdon. If Joseph Smith was supposedly targeted for being impure, as the popular story suggests, why then was Rigdon, a man not accused of such improprieties, singled out and brutalized even more viciously than Smith? Even Fair LDS raises this important question, and surprisingly, it forced me to reconsider the entire narrative. If Joseph's assault was truly about his rumored indiscretions with Mirinda Nancy Johnson, why was Rigdon, unconnected to these rumors, dragged out first and beaten almost to death? This inconsistency makes it clear that something more complex was at play. While I don't believe Rigdon was the sole target, it's become increasingly difficult to accept that Joseph's assault was motivated purely by the alleged relationship with Mirinda, though I have no doubt she later became one of his plural wives. The more I analyze, the more the official version falls apart. There are layers to this event that the church has conveniently glossed over, layers that raise questions about the true motives behind the mob's attack and the lengths the church has gone to hide or distort the truth. It is easier to deny a supposed affair than admit a mob had alternative motives than religious envy. The second account rings far more true when you consider the context. Joseph Smith, along with Sidney Rigdon, were rapidly accumulating land and consolidating power through the United Order, with members handing over their property to the church. This system gave Smith control over vast amounts of land and resources, making him an almost unchecked authority in the region. It's no wonder non-members were growing uneasy. Imagine watching religious leaders, already shrouded in controversy, quietly amassing land and power while setting up a theocratic stronghold right in your backyard. The tension was inevitable. Smith wasn't just a preacher, he was becoming a dictator. Month by month, his grip tightened. His power was no longer confined to spiritual matters. He now wielded authority over property, wealth, and ultimately, people's livelihoods. The locals surely saw the writing on the wall, and it terrified them. This wasn't merely about religious differences or petty accusations. This was about two men rising to unchecked power at a pace that no one could ignore. It's easy to see why this account feels more historically grounded. The mob wasn't there just because of rumors of infidelity. They were there because they feared what Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon were becoming. Leaders whose ambitions threatened not just their moral sensibilities, but their land, their security, and their autonomy. The more you dig into the circumstances, the clearer it becomes that this was about much more than personal grievances. It was about stopping men who were, by all appearances, on the road to absolute control. Part 3. The mysterious first vision unknown to most members. In 1832, Joseph Smith recorded the earliest known version of his first vision in Letterbook 1, a journal he kept closely guarded. This draft, penned with the help of his scribe Frederick Williams, revealed Smith's account of his divine visitation. But curiously, Smith kept this pivotal experience to himself, sharing it with no one outside of Williams. Then something more sinister occurred. Around 1930, the pages containing this first vision account were mysteriously torn from the journal. The document was removed from the church historian's collection and locked away in a private safe under the control of Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith. For decades, this early record was concealed, kept hidden from the public and the church membership. It wasn't until 1965 that this suppressed account finally came to light, published by Gerald and Sandra Tanner, despite intense efforts by the church to keep it under wraps. The revelation was explosive, raising serious questions about why the church had worked so hard to bury this early version of Joseph's vision, and what else might still be hidden from public view. Part 4. Rigdon's Coup. Let's rewind to August 1831 for context. Joseph Smith claimed to receive a revelation chastising Sidney Rigdon for overstepping his bounds. "I, the Lord, am not pleased with my servant Sidney Rigdon. He exalted himself in his heart. His writing is not acceptable unto the Lord, and he shall make another. And if the Lord receive it not, he standeth no longer in the office to which I have appointed him." This wasn't just a rebuke, it was a clear power move. Rigdon had grown too bold, and Joseph wasted no time reasserting control, pulling power firmly into his own hands. Fast forward to 1832, and the tension hadn't simmered down. With Joseph out of town, Rigdon seized the moment. On July 5th, he boldly proclaimed, "The keys of the kingdom were taken from us." His words sent shockwaves through the congregation, leaving many in tears. When someone attempted to close the meeting in prayer, Rigdon snapped, declaring it useless, and the gathering descended into chaos. Alarmed, Hiram Smith rushed to fetch Joseph. By July 7th, Joseph was back in Kirtland, and his response was swift and brutal. Publicly rebuking Rigdon, Joseph prophesied, "No power can pluck those keys from me, except the power that gave them to me. But for what Sidney has done, the devil shall handle him as one man handles another." Then, as if by divine retribution, Sidney Rigdon was violently thrown from his bed by an unseen force just weeks later. His family, hearing the commotion, entered the room to find him being hurled across the floor by an invisible power. Rigdon was bedridden for weeks, fulfilling Joseph's eerie prophecy with chilling precision. After this humiliating defeat, Rigdon had no choice but to fall in line. On July 28th, Joseph reordained him to the high priesthood after Rigdon had supposedly repented like Peter of old. It was clear Rigdon's attempted coup had failed, and Joseph's grip on the reins had only tightened. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.